Thank you for being here. My name is Arjen, and I would like to present to you a summary of my paper entitled Social Interaction in the Brain, which hopefully, with the help of these bright young minds here, can be accepted for publication. The paper focuses on the prefrontal cortex, which is a brain region right above your eyes here. And the prefrontal cortex is probably one of the most important but also mysterious brain regions that we have, especially when it comes to social interaction. Yet surprisingly, damage to your prefrontal cortex seems to have initially little effect. And we know this because of a famous case, the case of Phineas Gage, neuroscience's most famous patient. Phineas Gage was a 19th century railroad construction worker, and while at work, he suffered a horrible accident. An inch thick, about this size, iron rod, a long rod, was propelled right through his forehead. And you can see the image here, and it damaged much of his brain tissue and his brain connections. Well, you might be thinking now, well, he probably was seriously impaired, right? Or maybe even worse. Surprisingly, he got right up and regained full consciousness immediately thereafter. He was able to walk, he was able to talk still, and he continued to live for another 12 years almost. You see him here holding the iron rod, and I can assure you Bob has a replica in his office. It's really heavy. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the damage, the consequences for Phineas Gage. The evidence on his deficits are very limited. We do know from the few reports that are out there that his friends said he was no longer the same. Social interaction with him was different after the accident. And we also know that the railroad company refused to rehire him after the accident, but that's all we know. Fortunately, neuroscience continues to enlighten us, and a recent study showed by doing interviews with patients with prefrontal brain damage that they seem to be more inclined than healthy individuals to share, well, let's call it very private information about your most treasured memory or embarrassing moments, maybe even. And they were more inclined to share that type of information with the experimenters, which were effectively were strangers to them. So could it be that they were not taking into account, these patients, that they were interacting with a stranger as compared to, say, a close friend? And voila, that's how a research question is born. Is the prefrontal cortex necessary for adjusting communication to the person we are interacting with? So how do you investigate that question? Right? What you want is you want to measure communicative adjustments to who you believe to be interacting with. And second, you want to see whether those communicative adjustments are altered or different in patients with prefrontal brain damage. So this is how we measure communicative adjustment using a game, a computer game. And what you see here is the participant has to communicate to any of his two partners, shown on the right, where the acorn is located on the game board. And he can do that by moving his bird token around the game board, trying to signal somehow to the other player where the acorn is located. Now, we told the participants they were playing with two people. They were playing with a child, and they were playing with an adult partner. However, on the other end of that computer screen was sitting in another room one and same person, just one person. And that person was trying to interpret, and he was observing the movements of the bird, trying to interpret the movements of the bird and see, hopefully, be able to pick up the location, well, the acorn, using a squirrel token. But it was only the one and same person that was sitting there. And that way, any communicative adjustments we observe are purely driven by what the participant believes about his literacy, right? Whether it's a child or an adult. Now let's have a look at that in action, in real time. This is just a single interaction here. And what we see is that the subject is moving his bird to the acorn, and he returns. He always starts and he always ends at the nest in the center. And then it's the addressees or the partner's turn to move the squirrel and hopefully pick up the acorn. And it seems they did. Now let's look at this again. And this time, I would like you to focus on the moment the bird hits the location of the acorn, right now. What you see, and it's very hard to see maybe, that he spends a little bit longer on that location as compared to any of the other visited locations of the game board. Now, this is a common observation. What is also a common observation is that we see that people typically spend even longer on the location, so use more emphasis on the location when they believe to be playing with a child as compared when they believe to be playing with the adult ROC. Compare this to your everyday life maybe, where you might be using simpler words, speak slower when you're addressing a child as compared to an adult. And we hope to be tapping into that process with this game. Okay. Second, we recruited patients with prefrontal brain damage. So they had damage right here above the eyes in the front of the brain, either due to a stroke or trauma. And the overlap map of the patients is shown right here. So you're looking at the brain from the left side here. And you see that the damage is right here. And it's roughly around the same area where Phineas Gage also suffered his injury from that thick iron rod. Okay, let's move forward to the results of this study. What I've plotted here on the y-axis is communicative adjustment. And what we see is that so-called lesion controls, which are patients that also have brain damage, but not in the prefrontal cortex, and also healthy controls, which will be normal subjects, they show spontaneously a communicative adjustment. They spontaneously spend more time on the location of the acorn than on any of than when they were playing with a child as compared to when they were playing with the adult addressee. Prefrontal patients, despite that they were pretty good in the game itself, did not show this adjustment. It seemed that they did not take into account that when they were playing with a child as compared to when they were playing with the adult. That brings us to the conclusion of this study. It seems from these findings that the prefrontal cortex is necessary for adjusting your communication to the person we are interacting with. So next time when you are having a conversation with someone, remember that that region right here might be involved and is helping you to take into account who you are interacting with. And on that note, I would like to give back the word to my esteemed reviewers, and I'd like to thank you for your attention.
So who wants the...
Do people with damage to the prefrontal cortex know that they are acting differently than other people?
That's a very good question. And I think there's one study, the same study I was just talking about, where they were in this interview, might actually be able to give you an answer to that question. The short answer would be yes, but the longer answer would be no. It's kind of weird here. So let me explain this. So when they were in this interview, and the interviewer, the researcher, would ask them all kinds of questions, they were not, at that moment, they were not aware that they were showing all this sensitive information about themselves. Information, maybe think of your best memory. You would probably not tell it to me, right? But maybe to your friends or your family, right? And they were not aware of them sharing that kind of information with the experimenters. However, and this is the interesting bit, when they did show the videotapes of the same interview, right, to the participants, to these patients, they were kind of shocked. They were how do you say, surprised that they saw themselves sharing that information. So surprisingly, when you're in the moment, it seems these patients are not taking into account that knowledge, that they are interacting with a stranger and not to a close friend. But when looking back at that interaction, at that interview, using a videotape, then it seems they are. So it's a very interesting process going on. It seems really about the moment.
Kind of follow up what you said, when you said that they were shocked about how they were interacting with a stranger, like what their treasured moments. So is there any way you could train the other parts of the brain to pick up for the damage that's happened for the prefrontal cortex?
That's a very good question. Can we somehow train subjects so that other parts of the brain will take over, maybe, right? We do know that there are possibilities for recovery. So after brain damage, we know that the brain is generally very plastic. It means that it can adjust itself by training, for instance. However, it's not very clear for this region if that's possible. It really depends on basically the white matter tracks, the highways that run through the brain, whether those are also damaged. For instance, if you would cut one of my fingers, the other finger regions in my brain might start to take over. But losing an important region in the brain where maybe also highways run through, it's unclear how well recovery of that region might work out. So in short, I cannot give you the answer, but I hope we can in the future be able to give that answer. What was your question, Wyatt?
So, I've read about people who have lost parts of their brain and it regrows. If you were to lose your prefrontal cortex, would that be one of the parts of the brain that can come back? Or is it one of the parts of the brain where you lose it, you can't get it back?
That's a good question. I think it really follows up to what Krishna was asking as well. I guess the conclusion to that is it really depends on the extent. First of all, the extent of the brain damage is really important. How much of the functionality is lost in the first place, and second is what type of brain region brain structure is damaged. If it's a highway, it might be different from a parking lot, if I can put it like that. So it really depends on the type of the brain structure where it can recover.
I think we have time for one last question. Darius?
Okay. If the ventromedial prefrontal cortex was damaged, what other functionality would be affected? And also, what other parts of the brain are responsible for adaptive communication in addition?
That's a very good question. So let me answer your second question first. What other brain regions are involved? So of course, I'm showing here your data from patients. But we've also run the same task in healthy subjects while they were in, say, fMRI or EEG, what was explained in the previous talk. And what we typically see when we use these neuroimaging methods, we typically see that especially somehow on the right hemisphere seems to be the temporal lobe. Of course, the prefrontal cortex we also see being involved. We also see that the temporal lobe is also somehow very important. And if I may add to that, what is very interesting about those regions is they are not necessarily active when you are saying something or when you are listening something. It seems that they're really active the whole time. It seems they really are keeping track of what is being said here right now. So it's not they go on, off. It's really, they seem to be zooming, humming online, basically. So that's your second question, hopefully. That answers the second. The first one is, there are studies also outside the social domain on the role of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. What does it do? We don't know the answer, but an interesting study I like from the memory domain is where they show, if I would present you the words cold, winter, blizzard, and I ask you in say 2 weeks time whether you've also seen the word snow, you may be thinking, I think so. But this is the only test that patients with ventromedial prefrontal brain damage are much better at. They say, no, I'm pretty sure I haven't seen the word snow. So it seems that this region is somehow also involved in making a complete picture of, for instance, right, there's snow with cold with a blizzard. It paints a picture, basically, and that's in the memory domain. Perhaps it does similar kinds of tasks in the social domain.
All right, so the moment of truth now. Are we accepting minor revision, major revision, and inviting to resubmit, or are we rejecting? Some thumbs up there. Krishna's not sure. Thumbs up. Great. All right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you, guys.